The moment I stepped outside that morning, something felt off. The crisp autumn air smelled the same, the leaves crunched underfoot as usual, and yet an eerie silence hung over the cul-de-sac. It wasn't until I reached for my car keys and looked up that my stomach dropped. My driveway was empty. I blinked, shook my head as if my mind was playing tricks on me. But no, the spot where my car had been parked last night was completely bare. No broken glass, no tire marks, just an unsettling void where my car should have been. Panic shot through me. Had it been stolen? I sprinted back inside, grabbed my phone, and pulled up my security cameras. The footage loaded, and my confusion deepened into something colder, something sharper. A tow truck. At precisely 2:37 a.m., a white tow truck had backed into my driveway, hitched my car up in under 2 minutes, and driven off without hesitation. No struggle, no alarms, no hesitation. A legal repo? No way. I knew my payments were up to date. There had been no warnings, no calls, no paperwork taped to my door. This wasn't an accident. This was something else. Then the pit in my stomach turned into pure fire. I knew exactly who was behind this. Karen. She had been the head of our HOA for 3 miserable years, patrolling the neighborhood like some self-appointed dictator. Always finding something to complain about. My garbage cans were an inch too close to the curb, my mailbox wasn't the right shade of beige, my porch light was too bright. And of course, the driveway. She had been on a crusade against driveway clutter for months, sending out passive-aggressive emails about preserving the aesthetic integrity of the community. She had tried to cite me before, saying my car needed to be in the garage, even though the HOA rules clearly stated that homeowners could use their own driveways. I had dismissed her nonsense, and now she had escalated. I clenched my jaw and called the towing company. A bored-sounding man answered. "Yeah, we picked up a silver Lexus from my address last night. HOA authorization." I exhaled through my nose, barely keeping my voice calm. "And where is it now?" "Sold." My breath caught. "Excuse me?" "The HOA rep signed off on an emergency sale. It's already been auctioned off this morning." I stood there, gripping the phone so tightly my knuckles turned white. My car was gone. Not towed. Not impounded. Sold. Karen had illegally seized and sold my property overnight. My pulse steadied, my thoughts sharpening into cold precision. Because what Karen didn't know, what she couldn't have known, was that I wasn't just some helpless homeowner she could steamroll. I was a judge, and she had just committed a crime. I hung up without another word, turned on my heel, and walked back inside. My law degree, my years on the bench, the hundreds of cases I had presided over, all of it had been preparing me for this moment. Karen had made a grave mistake, and she was about to learn exactly what kind of consequences came with breaking the law. I didn't go to Karen's house right away. No, that would have been too easy, too predictable. And I wanted her to feel it, the slow, creeping dread of realizing she'd picked the wrong person to mess with. Instead, I spent the next 2 hours gathering every piece of documentation I needed. I pulled up the HOA bylaws, scouring every page for loopholes she might try to use as a defense. Nothing. There wasn't a single clause allowing her to tow, seize, or sell a homeowner's property without due process. Then, I retrieved my car's title, bank statements proving I had no outstanding payments, and the deed to my home, just in case she wanted to get creative. After that, I made a call. "Detective Monroe," a familiar voice answered. "David, it's me," I said, keeping my tone even. "I need a favor." A pause. "You sound pissed." "That's because I am." 5 minutes later, I had exactly what I needed. A recorded confirmation from the towing company that Karen had signed off on the illegal sale. A copy of the transaction details, showing my car had been auctioned off for a fraction of its value, and the buyer's information. I smiled. Now it was time. Karen's house was the biggest one on the street. A monstrosity of beige stucco with oversized pillars that screamed, "I have too much money and no taste." I took my time walking up her driveway, letting each step echo against the quiet morning. She opened the door on the third knock, her expression shifting from annoyance to feigned concern. "Oh, good morning. What brings you here?" I tilted my head. "I think you already know." She folded her arms, leaning against the doorframe like she had all the power in the world. "If this is about your car..." "It is about my car." I stepped closer, just enough to make her shift uncomfortably. The car that was illegally towed, illegally sold. Her eyes flickered, just for a second, before she plastered that same condescending smile on her face. I had every right to enforce HOA policies. Your car was an eyesore. I cut her off. No, you didn't. I pulled out my phone, tapped the screen, and let the recording from the towing company play. Karen's face paled as she heard them confirm she had signed the order personally, authorizing the sale. I let it sink in before speaking again. You committed fraud. You authorized the sale of property that didn't belong to you. That's grand theft, Karen. She scoffed, but I could see the panic creeping in. Oh, please. It was a misunderstanding. I smiled, but there was no warmth in it. No, Karen. A misunderstanding is when you forget someone's name. This is a felony. She opened her mouth, probably to spout some excuse, but I wasn't finished. I've already spoken with law enforcement. There's an official report on file. And I've contacted the buyer. They're willing to return my car after they press charges against you for fraudulently selling it. That did it. The color drained from her face completely. Wait, no. We don't have to get the police involved. I leaned in slightly. Oh, but we do. For the first time, Karen looked small. Powerless. She swallowed hard, her gaze darting around as if searching for an escape. I let the silence stretch between us before delivering the final blow. You have two options. One, you resign from the HOA immediately, issue a written apology to every homeowner you've ever harassed, and pay every dime of damages, including my legal fees. Karen licked her lips. And option two, I smiled again, you go to prison. Karen's face twisted in panic, her breath shallow as she clutched the doorframe like it was the only thing keeping her upright. The power she once wielded so smugly had vanished, replaced by the realization that she was trapped. Prison? She scoffed, but there was no confidence behind it. You're being dramatic. I crossed my arms, my stance firm. No, Karen, I'm being generous. Her eyes darted around as if searching for an escape. She had spent years bullying this neighborhood, convinced that her HOA title made her invincible. But now? Now she was standing in front of someone who knew the law far better than she did. She cleared her throat, trying to regain control. Look, maybe I overstepped, but it was for the good of the community. You have to understand. I held up a hand. Save it. I don't care about your justifications. The law doesn't care about them either. I pulled out my phone again and scrolled to another recording. I had a chat with the buyer of my car. They're pressing charges for fraudulent sale of stolen property. Her lips parted slightly. And here's the best part, I continued. The HOA's insurance doesn't cover fraud committed by a board member, which means all legal damages will be coming out of your pocket. So if you're thinking of fighting this, I leaned in just enough to watch her flinch. You better be ready to lose everything. Karen's throat bobbed as she swallowed. This is extortion. I chuckled. No, Karen, this is justice. For a moment, she just stood there, frozen. Then, without another word, she turned on her heel and disappeared into the house. The door slammed shut behind her. I exhaled, letting the tension ease from my shoulders. I wasn't worried. She had no moves left. She could try to squirm her way out of it, but it was too late. The law was on my side. I turned and walked back down her driveway, but before I reached the sidewalk, the door flew open again. Wait! I stopped, smirking to myself before slowly turning around. Karen was standing in the doorway, holding a stack of papers and shaking hands. I'll do it, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I took the papers, flipping through them. Her resignation letter, a formal apology addressed to every homeowner in the community, and a written statement acknowledging her wrongdoing. I looked up. And the money? Her jaw tightened. I'll pay. That was all I needed to hear. I gave her a slow nod, then slipped the papers into my briefcase. Smart choice, Karen. She didn't respond, just stood there, defeated, as I turned and walked away. By the time I got home, the neighborhood group chat was already buzzing. Word traveled fast, and within minutes, residents were celebrating her downfall. People shared their own stories, unfair fines, petty rules, threats of legal action over ridiculous violations. Karen had ruled this neighborhood like a tyrant for too long. Now she was done. I poured myself a cup of coffee, leaned back in my chair, and smiled. Justice had been served. By the time the news of Karen's downfall spread, the entire neighborhood was in an uproar. Messages flooded the HOA group chat, Emails poured in, and within hours, someone had already drafted a petition to permanently ban her from ever holding a position of authority again. I wasn't surprised. Karen had spent years making people's lives miserable. She enforced rules that didn't exist, issued fines for petty reasons, and acted as if the entire neighborhood was her personal kingdom. But now she was just another homeowner, stripped of her power, forced to answer for everything she had done. And it wasn't over yet. That afternoon, I got a call from Detective Monroe. "Got some good news for you," he said. "Your car's on its way back." I exhaled in relief. "The buyer cooperated?" "Oh, more than that," Monroe chuckled. "Turns out they weren't too happy when they found out the sale was illegal. They're filing a civil suit against Karen for damages, and since she can't claim HOA protection, she's personally liable." I grinned. "She's going to be paying for this for years." "No doubt," Monroe agreed. "Also, I spoke with the DA's office. They're looking into pressing charges. Fraud, theft, abuse of power. Karen's in deep." I leaned back in my chair, letting it all sink in. Karen had spent so long bullying people, convinced she was untouchable. But now, she was facing real consequences. And I wasn't done yet. The next morning, I attended the emergency HOA meeting. The air was electric with anticipation. Homeowners who had spent years biting their tongues were finally ready to speak up. Karen sat at the head of the table, but she looked different now. Smaller. Powerless. Her usual arrogance was gone, replaced by a nervous energy that made her hands fidget in her lap. She knew what was coming. The HOA president cleared his throat. "We're here to address some serious concerns." He glanced at me, then at Karen. "There's been a formal complaint filed against Karen Simmons for abuse of power, fraud, and unlawful property seizure." Karen stiffened. "I already resigned." The president nodded. "That's correct, but that's not enough." He turned to the rest of the board. "A vote has been requested to permanently ban her from any future HOA involvement and to revoke any remaining authority she might hold over community affairs." Karen's head snapped up. "What?" A murmur spread through the room. A few hands shot up immediately. Others followed. One by one, every board member voted in favor. I raised my hand last. Karen turned to me, eyes burning with resentment. "You did this." I met her gaze, unflinching. "No, Karen, you did this." The president nodded. Motion passed. And just like that, it was over. Karen was officially powerless. No more fines, no more threats, no more control. She pushed back her chair abruptly and stormed out, slamming the door behind her. But no one followed. No one cared. For the first time in years, the neighborhood was free. As I walked out of the meeting, a few neighbors clapped me on the back, thanking me for standing up to her. I smiled, but deep down, I knew it wasn't just about me. It was about all of us. And Karen, she had finally learned what it felt like to be powerless. Karen's downfall sent ripples through the entire neighborhood. People who had once cowered under her ridiculous rules were now speaking up, sharing their stories, and celebrating her removal. The group chat was flooded with messages, some relieved, some furious that it had taken this long, and some just enjoying the show. But for me, it wasn't over until I had my car back. That evening, just as the sun dipped below the horizon, I heard the rumble of an approaching tow truck. I stepped outside, watching as it pulled up to my driveway. My car, the same one that had been snatched from me in the dead of night, was finally coming home. The driver hopped out, clipboard in hand. "Judge Daniels?" I nodded. "Got your car right here, sir." He patted the hood before unhooking it from the truck. "The buyer wanted me to pass along a message. They said, tell that HOA lady she better lawyer up." He let out a low chuckle. I smirked. "She's going to need more than a lawyer." As he handed me the keys, I ran a hand along the familiar frame of my Lexus, exhaling slowly. It wasn't just about the car. It was about what it represented. Karen had tried to take something from me, something that was mine, and she had paid the price for it. The driver gave me a nod before climbing back into his truck and pulling away. I stood there for a moment, just staring at my car, feeling a deep sense of satisfaction settle in my chest, and then, as if on cue, a voice cut through the quiet. "You think you've won?" I turned slowly. Karen stood at the edge of my driveway, her arms crossed, her expression twisted with barely contained rage. I sighed. "Karen, go home." Her nostrils flared. "This isn't over. You think just because you got your car back and embarrassed me in front of the neighborhood, that's the end of it?" She stepped forward, lowering her voice. I have connections, friends, people who actually respect me. I chuckled. Respect you, Karen? They tolerated you, and now they don't even have to do that. Her jaw clenched. I can fight this. I leaned against my car, arms crossed. Karen, let me explain something to you, since you clearly still don't get it. I stepped forward, my voice calm, measured. This is over. You illegally seized and sold my property. You committed fraud. You broke laws you didn't even bother to understand. And now, you're about to be drowning in legal fees and criminal charges. Her face paled, but I wasn't done. You've spent years making people's lives miserable, fining them for things that weren't violations, threatening them with lawsuits, acting like you owned this place. I tilted my head. But now, you're nothing. No power, no title, no authority, just another homeowner who no one respects. Her lips trembled, but she forced herself to keep that stubborn glare. You're going to regret this. I smirked. No, Karen. I'm going to enjoy it. She stared at me for a long moment, her hands clenching into fists at her sides. And then, finally, she turned on her heel and stormed off, disappearing into the night. I watched her go, feeling nothing but satisfaction. The storm had passed. The neighborhood was free, and for the first time in years, everyone could breathe. I turned back to my car, slid into the driver's seat and started the engine. The purr of the engine was smooth, familiar. Mine. Justice had been served.